Again, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about what is Advocates for Children. Advocates for Children is an independent agency that protects the educational rights of all New York City students. It was founded in 1971 by parents of students with disability. The mission has expanded over the years. Our mission is to ensure a high quality education for New York City students who face barriers to academic challenges and all students from low income backgrounds. Sorry, I'm stuttering here. Our services include our helpline, which is toll free. It's open Monday through Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. The number is listed right here on our presentation. We provide information through our guides and resources. We offer free workshops and trainings throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. We also provide free legal services to low-income families.
While we're doing this, I'm going to just launch a poll because we like to know who's joining us. So if you can answer this quickly, that would be great.
We want to know where you're from.
Okay.
Who's
well,
joining
the first
us
one
today?
is, who are you? Are you a student? By that, we mean middle or high school. We do get a lot of people in education school or something. But are you a parent, an educator, or other professional? So we'll give this a little bit of time. It really helps us know who's here, and so we can try to gear our trainings for the right audience. Okay. All right. So it looks like we're majority parents here. I'll let you know so you guys can see. Majority parents and educators and other professionals. Okay. And there's one more poll, which is the one Melissa was just talking about. Oops.
That's great. We have a lot of parents in the room.
Okay. And here's this one of where you're from. Oh, Brooklyn's winning. Oh. Okay, so it looks like Brooklyn and Manhattan are pretty much neck and neck right now. So just in case you're interested in who's here. Okay, so thank you so much for doing that.
All right, so we're gonna talk quickly about an overview of today's workshop. We're gonna talk about how to apply, what's new. We have a lot. New is an understatement. That's what we were saying. We have a lot of new things happening this year. The types of programs, learning about schools, and questions and answers. We'll leave questions and answers for the end. And in between, we're going to also pause to take a second to answer the questions for the Q&A. And feel free to type.
Yeah, sorry, you're just saying it.
Feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A chat as well. So let's talk about a few dates to remember. For middle school, the middle school application had opened the week of January 11th. And so that application is officially open. The deadline to apply for middle school is February 9th. For high school, it actually opened January 18th, which is this week. And the deadline to apply for high school is February 23rd. For the Shahzad actually closed January 15th. That date has already passed. The deadline to apply has already passed. However, it is important to know that the test, for those who are taking the test will be administered January 27th at their school. For current 9th graders and for students in charter schools and students in private schools, it will be January 30th or February 7th at a central DOE location. So again, the deadline for the Shahzad did pass. It was January 15th. They are issuing tickets like usual, which parents can print out from their Myschools account. If families are unable to print out tickets, your school counselor will do it for you. So don't hesitate to ask your school counselor to print out this ticket for you. Unfortunately, this year, there will be no virtual options. The DOE to take the test virtually. The DOE is ensuring families that the testing conditions will be safe. They are running temperature checks and they're requiring masks and they're taking all necessary precautions, but there are no virtual tests this year. So this is our, families are encouraged to apply online through Myschools.nyc. Families can use Myschools to apply to middle and high schools. You can get started by creating an account. The DOE should have sent a creation code to your email and through the mail. Or if you do not have one yet, you can ask your guidance counselor. You will need this code to create the account. You can ask for help if you don't have a computer or reach out to the Family Welcome Center. You can also explore your children's, and on this website, you can explore your child's personalized schools and options and get guidance on the admission. So what's new this year? New York City's middle schools won't screen applicants based on grades, attendance, and or test scores. So what this means is that all selective screening criteria, such as test scores, grades, have been eliminated. And correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, because I'm blanking out here for a second. And so for high school, there are no district preferences for high schools this year, which means that they will no longer be able to give preferences to students in the who live in the surrounding districts. Last year, there was a new process where there were no appeals. That continues this year. There are no round twos as well. Instead, students will be waitlisted, which we will get more into that a little later on in the presentation. For screened high schools can't look at attendance and or lateness. They can use the 2019-2020 scores and grades. Some schools are using mid-year grades. So that's something to note. Some schools are using final grades. Some schools are using mid-year grades. So the process for the high school and middle school application looks as so. An offer will be made in spring. Your child will be waitlisted at any school listed above the match. So you will receive a letter that includes information about any program where your child is waitlisted. You can join the waitlist online, but once you join the waitlist, your child will be at the bottom, will be placed at the bottom. You can check the waitlist in real time. So for example, if your child got an offer for their third choice program, they would automatically be waitlisted for their first and second choice programs. So if your child got an offer for their first choice program, they will not be added to any waitlist. After offers are available, as I mentioned, you can add your child to additional waitlists while they are open, but they will be put at the bottom. You can definitely use your Myschools account to see where your child is on the wait list and to add or remove your child from wait lists. There are no appeals, as I mentioned, but you can still apply for transfers, which include medical, hardship, and or accessibility. So the middle school program types. We're going to talk about the different programs available. So for the middle school admissions, many middle school students in New York City attend their zone schools. So if you have a zone school, you're guaranteed a spot or priority. If you're not sure which one is your zone school, you can, we've provided the hyperlink, but you can also go on the DOE website to double check. and make sure to find out which one is your child's own school. For district, it's only open to students in that district. For borough programs, it's open to all students in that borough. There are also citywide schools. So borough-wide programs are open to all students in that particular borough. I just want to clarify that. And for citywide schools, open to any New York City student. We're gonna take a second to pause and answer your questions. So if you have any questions that we can answer, please type it in the Q&A.
Yeah, at this point, it doesn't look like we have any questions, which is unusual. I hope this is working. Yeah. Oh, okay, there they go. Somehow
They're coming in.
Okay. Wow, they all seem to come in right at once. So, oh, okay. So somebody asked, what does it mean if there's no preference for high school? I think that's when they said, when Melissa had said earlier that there's no longer any district preference for high school. So this was something that was pretty contentious, an issue that people had really strong feelings on. But some districts, and they were often the districts that were the most sought after school districts, like District 2, for example, which is Midtown and downtown Manhattan, which has some of the most competitive high schools, had a District 2 preference, which meant you had a much better chance of getting in if you lived in that area. As that area has, become whiter and richer, that's something that's, a lot of people were saying, why is there a District 2 preference for high school when many students travel all over the city? So that's one of the things that was gone. There are still borough preferences. For the Bronx, for example, if you live in the Bronx, you can apply for, there's some preferences for getting into that school, but not district preferences. Okay, so just looking through the questions, I'll see if there's a lot of them coming in. We thought this is often a training that when we do it live, we get a lot of questions. So what we might try to do to keep the thing moving is I'll keep going on the presentation. We'll answer the questions as we can in the Q&A and answer the ones when we'll pause again with another slide like this. And Liliana can jump in if there's a whole bunch of questions that are on the same topic, we can try to answer them at that point. So please feel free to keep the questions coming as we're talking. We're not gonna, I can't even see it when I'm speaking, so it's not a problem. And then when we pause, we can try to lump them together. So we do want to try to get to all of your questions. If we don't, we will certainly have our contact information in there and we'll try to answer them. I know this is it's a lot to learn for all parents.
Thank you, Kim.
Okay, so for high school programs, this is an area that changed a lot. Well, I guess middle schools did change a lot too. The idea that there's a lottery that you can apply. A lot of middle schools in the past, you had to look at what your 4th grade test scores were. Because of COVID, I think the DOE said that's really not fair. People had really different abilities to access instruction that had nothing to do with their students and everything to do with what was going on in their families during COVID. So high schools are also pretty different this year, but I'm going to go through some of the different admissions methods that there are. There's specialized schools, which I know Melissa talked about this before. Those are the 9 state schools that are 9 schools with a state test that's administered in different ways, like LaGuardia or Bronx Science or Brooklyn Tech. And those are still based on the score. The screened and audition schools are the ones that really are changing the most. And we'll get into some very detailed information as best as we can untangle this. To be honest, we were changing slides about an hour ago based on stuff that we found. So we're going to tell you what we know to date. And it is January, what is it, the 19th? So we'll tell you what we know so far. But you really want to do some research if you want to screen schools. These are schools that in the past would look almost always at scores and test scores, and some of them could be pretty competitive. Ed Opt is schools that had a real range of students. So they took students who were really high scores. They took students who didn't do as well on tests, and they had some spots for just random, just ranking, lottery. Okay, some schools that haven't changed with admissions things during COVID, screen language schools, which are for students coming in who speak a language other than English. They do look at how long you've been in the US, language proficiency, et cetera. Transfer schools, those are for older students who often are undercredited. And you want to look at the program age and academic requirements. Those are really good for students who are in high school but are struggling right now. And zoned and open schools. There are pretty few zoned high schools, but if you do live in an area, I think it's exclusively in Queens, there's a few areas that have zoned high schools, and they really tend to be very big schools. You just apply and you'll get in. For open schools, they take anybody. It's just a random lottery in high school. Okay, so learning about a school, and this is where we tend to get the most questions. So as you probably already know, you'd look up school information on My-Schools, and you can look it up by name. You can filter in a few different ways. We just picked randomly this school, Thurgood Marshall. It's actually a school that's 6 through 12, so it's middle school and high school. And you can see on the bottom here, this is where you would click, where I circled in the red. You would click it to see the program information, and you'd get more information about, well, what are the criteria to get into the school? What kind of school is it? And you can see that it's actually this part we didn't do a screenshot of, but it's actually a screen school. And it shows you the demand for seats. This is something that as you start comparing schools, you're going to see a real difference. So as you can see in here, for Gen Ed, there were 5 applicants per seat. And for students with disabilities, there were 6 applicants per seat. And so this is a school that I think the DOE would say is, it's easier to get into. It's not a hugely high demand school. All seats were filled. I mean, I think it's a good school, but it is still something that, it's less competitive to get into. If this is a school that works for you, that's good to know. I mean, 5 students per seat might sound like a lot, but keep in mind that that's on all applications. And also if you were looking at it last year, you would see under selection criteria, and this is in My-Schools, it would have given you the grades. And so you can see in the standardized test scores, the range. So you can see that last year, and for the 2020 high school year, 2019-2020, they took kids with course grades of an average of 64 to 100 and standardized test scores with a pretty big range too. So it means that if you have a child who had a bad year on a standardized test, or whose grades it's up and down, this would be a school where you'd be like, oh, okay, this is something that's still doable. They take a wide range of kids. Unfortunately, this year in My-Schools, all you'll see, you won't see that range. You'll see just this in terms of, well, they look at ELA math and test scores, they look at final grades, and they look at middle period grades, marking period grades. So it's a little bit tougher to untangle it. I think what you're going to want to look at is more applicants per seat to figure out how hard it is to get into the school, because for all parents, that's often the question they're asking. You only want to, I know we'll talk about this at the end, but one of the points that we can't stress enough, only list a school you would want to go to. Don't list a safety school you've never heard of because it has a low number of things, or somebody told you it's okay. Like, you really want to, I know this is exhausting and it's so easy to say, and it was so much work as a parent, even a parent who worked at Advocates for Children pre-COVID, and it's even more work now. It's just different, the amount of work you have to do. Don't list a school that you don't know. And so that's why a lot of questions that come in are about, well, how likely am I to get into the school? You don't want to list, the Harvard of high schools, and that's not going to be a good fit for your kid. But how do you figure that out? And it's a lot of research, unfortunately. So I picked another school. This is a super sought after school. Used to have District 2 preference. So this is what we found on My-Schools, and My-Schools actually hadn't been updated. This was this is a screenshot from this year. So yeah, this is one example of something where we discovered that things had been changed this week, maybe because it just opened up this week. But when Melissa and I were prepping for this and creating these slides, this is what it said before. We know that when you're looking down this, you can see, wow, this is a super sought after school, 54 applicants per seat, 5,300 applicants, priority to District 2, that is no longer true. And the screen schools, it doesn't say that much here. So this is, oh yeah, I forgot I animated the slide. This is what it said last week, that they're ranked in this way. So then, sorry, my thing is freezing up. This week, as it said this, that students are ranked by school selection criteria below. And then this had some information on the percentages, which is like what I just showed you for Thurgood Marshall. So it tells you, do they care about test scores or grades more? But then you look at the website, and this is where it says it's no longer a District 2 priority school. Here it says Gen Ed students, and this is, I went to Eleanor Roosevelt's website. It says Gen Ed students with an 85 and plus average, or students with disabilities with an 80 plus average, will be considered based on the 7th grade mid-year or equivalent report cards. That's a big change from in the past, and they're very specific about what they're looking for here. And also another change is that they say they don't rank qualified students, so that 54 people applying for one seat, they don't care that they're not only looking at people who had 99s and 4s on the state tests. If you're above that 85, you have as good of a chance as anybody else to get in. So that's a change, for example. And that's what it says on their website. And for all schools, attendance doesn't count, because obviously attendance was really different this past year for everybody. But then comparing what they say on their open house, and I'm sorry if your head is spinning, but we just want to tell you all the different places to look at. So there's My Schools, there's the website, and this is what they said at their open house. The one good thing with open houses is most schools have a recorded webinar, so you can go look at it even if you missed it. But at least from what I know, this one says that Gen Ed and students with disabilities with an overall average of 85 or up will be considered. Now that's different than what it says on their website, right? Where it says if you're a student with disability, it's 80 and up. This also does say though that it's by lottery if you meet those criteria. So that was just trying to give you a detailed dive into researching a school and what to try to figure out with conflicting information. I think when in doubt, you can try contacting a school. And I think in general, whatever you hear at an open house or see on their website is more likely to be up to date than the My Schools page, but it is really confusing. Okay, so we'll pause here for questions. Liliana, are there any you think we should be answering live now?
Yes.
Yes.
Actually,
I had a few.
All right. So first, there was the question: is the citywide separate application and a separate choice, or is it the same?
Citywide meaning what?
That's what I was confused about. So is the citywide program a separate application, a separate choice? Maybe
if you mean District 75, unfortunately, for a brief time they were talking about allowing parents to apply, and certainly I would encourage you to reach out to the placement officer if you're hearing from one, but in general you just get a placement.
Okay. And then if a child is a NEST student going to middle school, but there is no NEST schools in my district, what will be my preference level? We might need to come back to that one because I'm not 100% sure about the placement process for NEST.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be outside of it. We'll go through some of the things that are outside the general admissions. So there's a whole bunch of specialized programs within, I'm sorry, it's so confusing, not meaning the 9 specialized high schools, but specialized programs within DOE public D1 through 32 schools, like NEST or bilingual programs or barrier-free programs, where they're going to process your application in a little bit of a different way.
And now I'm going to collapse a couple of questions into one. I'm going to try. So the question is about priority level. So one parent is asking if they only put one school as a priority and they do not include any other schools and they do not get that choice, what happens? And in addition to that, do you have to place your zone priorities, your zone school as a priority in order to get a space? Or if you place another school above your zone school, do you lose your priority because you placed another school above?
My understanding is your zone school you can put as your 12th choice and it's fine. You still should be able to get in. This question we get every year, and my least favorite questions when we get it after the application process is over, where somebody said, well, I just listed Eleanor Roosevelt 12 times, but they didn't give it to me. I know that's not exactly what this question is saying. You definitely want to list as many schools as you feel comfortable having your child go to. And as wide a list as you can make it, the better off you'll be, for the reasons that Melissa was describing about the change in the application process. If you're a parent who had somebody go through this a few years ago, eliminating the appeals process does make things pretty different. And that happened last year for the first time. So if you can list 5 schools that you think would be a good fit for your child and list them in your, true order of preference, you will be waitlisted. Let's say you get into your, let's say you list 6 schools, you get into your 6th school, but wow, you really wanted one of the top 5. You will be waitlisted at all of those top 5 automatically because it was on your application. And you'll have a better chance of getting in there because you'll be higher up on the waiting list because you listed it the first time. Yes, you can go in after you get your 6th choice school and put your child in, but as Melissa was explaining before, you'll be at the bottom of the list. Whereas if you had listed it the first time, it's more random. Like you might be low on the wait list, you might be high on the wait list. And from what we've heard, those wait lists do move, and they tended to move right up until the start, even after school started. So you can keep checking. I think at some point you do have to accept a school, and if you get an offer from a school on your wait list, you might have a limited time to reply, but those wait lists do move. So it's a different a different kind of process to figure it out.
I have one last one for you before we move on. And this, a parent is asking, for schools that are 6 to 12, students who are in grade 8 will need to reapply for 9th grade? Yes or no?
No, we're going to cover that. Don't worry. Okay. I'm sorry, you do have to reapply, but you have preference, but we'll get to it.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
All right, so now we're going to get into screening methods. And the reason we have this lovely photo of a ring of fire is because that's what we're all going through as parents, right? This is what we have to go through to apply for middle school and high school. And so we can go ahead and start. So the first process would be if your child is artistic, musically inclined, anything that falls within the arts, you're probably considering an audition school, right? A few of the schools that include audition schools is the famous LaGuardia. We also have, for example, Talent Unlimited High School, Repertory, PPAS, high schools for fashion industries, and Borough High School. Because COVID-19 has had such a profound impact across the entire school system, including the admissions. As a result, Audition High School admissions programs for auditions will be taking place remotely. Students still have to prepare a vocal, musical instrument piece, drama, and or art portfolio, but it will be submitted online, virtually. Audition programs rank students based on the performing arts audition and or portfolio. Audition requirements, dates, and times are included on the school pages. And also, not all as of yet, but some through Myschools as well. Materials, there are materials for your high school auditions. Your child can apply to more than one program. So for example, if they're If they can play an instrument and they also sing, they can apply for the music program and also the vocal program through the new virtual audition submission, which is due March 1st. Your child should register, apply by February 23rd on Myschools, but the last day for the virtual audition submissions is March 1st. So that the tool available on Myschools includes detailed information and instructions. Only the audition programs on your list will be submitted through the high school application in Myschools. Myschools will review and evaluate the materials and videos you submit through that particular form. Screen language. So students are matched based on English proficiency or a specific language spoken at home. This admission is based on a student's level of knowledge of the English language. English language learners have priorities to these programs. You can check the eligibility under admissions priority on each school's directory page to find out if the program has this specific requirement. We just had this question for continuing students. It's a guaranteed match regardless of available seats. This includes middle school and high school. Continuing students have guaranteed match to their schools if they list it on their applications, regardless of the admission methods and or available seats. For zone and geographic, students receive priority and are guaranteed based on where you live. So again, you can double check the DOE website, type in your address to double check and see where your zone school is or where based on where they're currently attending. For high school, this is very new. There are no district preferences this year. That has been taken away. You can check schools.nyc.gov. This presentation will be available. We will be sending it out. It is also recorded so that everyone has access to the links to check out where to get this information or to find out where their zone school is. So now we're going to briefly talk about specialized programs in District 1 through 32 schools. So you have the bilingual ICT or a special class. These are programs that are only available in certain District 1 through 32 schools. So if a student's IEP recommends one of these programs, the DOE will give the student specifically set a seat available in the recommended program. The bilingual ICT and bilingual class can be recommended on a student's IEP or for whoever it is appropriate. For ASD, Nest, and Horizon, it's a special type of ICT class. All the students with IEPs are students with an autism classification. The classes are much smaller than other ICT class. Students at or above grade level. It's a very competitive program. Then you have ASD Horizon, which is also a small special class for students with ASD. Generally with a ratio of 8 students, a special education teacher, a paraprofessional, again, students with ASD. Compared to the NEST program, students in Horizon may need additional help with academic and or behavior. And they also apply the principles of applied behavioral analysis. For the ACES program, it's a small specialized class where students in the class are classified as students with intellectual disabilities. We also have barrier free. This is not a program, but we include it here to highlight that not all schools are accessible schools. Please note this. Not all buildings can serve students who have a wheelchair or have other mobility, vision, or hearing needs that affect their ability to get around. You can see these schools, which ones are fully or partially accessible on myschools.nyc or in the admissions guide as well, if it's been updated. If your child needs an accessible school, you should definitely raise it at the IEP meeting or have a discussion with the guidance counselor.
And we'll go through this a little bit later too.
Yep. Schools outside of the DOE admissions process, these programs are not available in District 1 through 32 schools. So District 75 is a separate school district intended for students who have severe needs that require more support. So students are placed by the DOE placement office. This does not require an additional application. We also have the AIMS program. It's new District 75 programs for students with autism and ABA. It's a special class program, again, as I mentioned, for students with autism. And unlike the ASB program, this program is located in District 75 schools. Again, District 75 schools are a separate school district intended for students who have severe needs that require additional support. We also have the private school and non-approved school. So we also have NPS, which is let me back up a second. We also have NPS, a state-approved non-public schools. I got it. So these are private special education schools approved by the state of New York for students whose needs cannot be met in a public school program. Usually you can get this through an IEP recommendation and or a P1, which is also considered a Nickerson, which is only good for a year, and or through a hearing. It's at no cost to the parents. Unlike District 75 programs, the non-public schools serve children with all disability classification. And for private school, non-approved, this is possible through impartial hearing. You would have to file a hearing yearly. So what are you looking for in a school? What to consider? We get this question a lot. We say, hey, what school is best for my child? What do you recommend? Please tell me what school my child should be in. You're the parent, you know your child the best. We can provide a few options for you to consider and to think about while applying. We cannot tell you which school specifically your child should be in, but we can tell you what you can consider. So if your child is into sports and clubs, you definitely don't want to look at a school that does not have this available for them. You want to take this into consideration. You know, if your child likes baseball or if there's an after school program, look into this. Accessibility, I mentioned this a little earlier. You want to check if the school is accessible. Some schools are partially accessible, some schools are not accessible at all. You want to make sure that your child is able to get in and out of the building and get around the school safely. You want to check the graduation rate as well. You can consider whether the school is small or large. Some small schools tend to offer more personal attention. I know for my daughter, that's the perfect choice, but that's not the same for everyone. You know, some kids like a personal attention and a sense of community. They serve fewer students. Some schools are very, very large. Larger schools tend to have the sports, the arts, the clubs, and more choices in courses. But this is something that you would need to consider. Like some students don't thrive in larger schools. There are also some mid-sized schools available that you can also check on Myschools as well. Consider the size and the location, and also transportation. How far the location? How far is it? Can my child take the train safely or the bus? Is it walk? Do you want your child to walk to school? Is it walking distance? These are all a few things to consider, like special education services, which we'll definitely touch up on. How safe is the school? You can check, is bullying a concern within the school as well? Like, will my child feel safe? Each school shows how safe each student feels in the school. You definitely want to check into that as well. And whether they offer CTE and job training. CTE schools combine traditional high school coursework and professional training in a trade. If that's for your child, you want to definitely check to see if your child if that is available for your child at the school. For the most part, these are the same things you should be looking at, whether your child has an IEP or not. You should be looking at what schools are best for your child and what will most likely meet their needs. So now we're going to take another second to pause. And if anyone has any additional questions that we can answer.
One question I am seeing come up that I think Liliana is working on answering, but is, how many schools should I list, or what schools should I list? Those are unfortunately the kind of questions that we can't really answer. I mean, we can say, don't list 2 schools, don't list 12 schools if you've only heard of 6 of them. It's a really tough choice, and it really depends on the schools and your child and the situation. So it's really almost impossible for us to answer that with a, specific number. I just think list as many as you can that you would go to. And there was another question I thought was really interesting about how do I find out about school programs with programs for kids with dyslexia. They are doing a better job at trying to create programs for students with dyslexia, something that until recently the DOE really didn't acknowledge. And it was one of the reasons why so many students with what's one of the most common disabilities ended up in private school or with private tutoring. The DOE is trying to do it. I think they're better in elementary school than middle school and high school, but it's certainly something that, I would encourage you to check on the DOE website. We've had some trainings on it. And to reach out specifically to DOE Central, you can always email special education at schools.nyc.gov. You might have to email them a couple times. I think they get a lot of emails, but ask specifically for, can I get a list of high schools or middle schools that offer this program if you're interested in a particular program. Liliana, any other questions that we should cover now?
Sorry, I was muted. I was just typing an answer, so I don't know if you actually covered this, but I think you may have. So a parent asked if there was a place to find a list of schools that have the Middle School Quality Initiative, which is a Wilson OG intervention program.
Yeah, that's the one I actually just did.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
I was completely looking at it.
No, that's fine. I think we were both intrigued by that question. So.
Yes, and then there's one that I was just starting to type up. She says, my son has type 1 diabetes and we would like to have him go to a school that is close to where we work. Type 1 diabetes is a medical disability that doesn't fall under the IEPs. So I started to say, that's right. However, you may have a 504 plan for medical accommodations. Now, the question I think that she's really getting into is how does she include the information about requiring a specific type of school for a medical disability in the application process?
I mean, that's a really good question. I would say if your child also has an IEP, even though that's not something that would be covered by IEP services, make sure it's described in the health needs in that section. And to state the obvious, list schools in that area, as many as you can that you agree with. Also, that would be a very valid reason to ask for a medical transfer if it didn't work out. So that's what I would recommend.
I would agree with that. Let's see. And am I able to watch this on a website? Yes, this is recorded and we should be able to post it later so you can watch what you have missed.
Usually takes 2 days. Yeah.
It takes a couple of days, but that includes, some other questions that we have covered. So for example, what is EdUp and other bits and pieces. And let me go through these to see. This is interesting. It is really difficult to get a sense of how particular schools handle children with disabilities, children with IEPs, even after attending tours and asking questions about this.
Yeah, I'm going to get into my detailed, hopefully, not too detailed, but probably it is very detailed ways to analyze this. So since we still have quite a bit more, I'm going to start going, but that's a question that I certainly had as a parent, and I'll talk you through some of that. So one thing, in the factors that we talked about, ways to get, to figure out, will my child be prioritized at this school? Something that's been new in the past couple of years is diversity in admissions. And some schools are looking at income. By income, they look at free and reduced price lunch, or students who are learning English, students in temporary housing. When we send this around, this link will tell you, it lists all the different schools and which ones have a diversity and admissions program. And that's a really important thing to look at, so that if your child receives free or reduced lunch and you're below the cutoff that you understand this school typically takes, you still might want to list it on your application or pretty high up, because it's, you might have an advantage because of they're looking for students that fit that criteria. Okay, so this has come up in the questions, already, and it is complicated. So what does it mean to have a student with an IEP? Everybody at this point, you've seen the SWD, which is a little annoying because it's not entirely the same thing as a student with an IEP. You can obviously have a disability and not have an IEP. But for here, what does it mean to get in that bucket of students with disabilities where you may have different criteria applied for screened schools? It means that if more than 20% of your classes, not including lunch, are special education, in other words, SETs, ICT, or small class, then you are a student with disability set aside. So you still might be saying, I still don't get this. So what we did is try to take through a typical middle school has 35 classes per week. Now, your middle school might be a little bit different, so it's something to take a look at. But typically what we're seeing is less than 20% is somebody with related services, like who's getting speech, 5 times sets, for example, but not in a special class. More than 20% would be ICT for all classes, small class for all classes, or if you have something like sets times 10. So you want to look at the number of periods that are special education programs, so not related services, but are special ed programs, ICT or sets, meaning it's a special education teacher teaching them, and figure it out that way. So, every year we get this question, and they're looking at the IEP now to figure that out. Okay, so school accessibility, Melissa covered this a little bit. It is really important if you or your child have accessibility needs. It's something to take a look at. Partially accessible, and this is wheelchair accessible, is tricky because it can be a wide range. For that, you're going to want to click on this link and look up building accessibility. This is, does require you to dig a bit, but you'd look it up on My Schools. You'd look up something called the BAP, or the Building Accessibility Profile. And it goes from 0 to 10. So 9 out of 10, probably a lot of things are accessible. Lower than 8, you may not really be able to get up to any other floors. There may be some problems with bathrooms. You might not be able to get into the auditorium or on stage. And of course, this is not so relevant during COVID. You can't really visit the school, but if you have a child who needs this, you want to reach out to the school and ask them as many questions as you can and read that profile really carefully. Okay, so special education admissions. This is another question that I've already seen come up in the Q&A. Students with IEPs apply the same way as other students for District 1 through 32 schools. The new school, so if you're going into middle school or going into high school, under the law is supposed to or must implement the IEP. And if they want to change your IEP, it has to be based on the student's needs, not the school's, what the school has. So for example, for some kids, they might have an ICT. They might be okay with gen ed with extra sets, if that would work. But for other students, it won't work. I think the thing to keep in mind is that it can be more complex. And this really goes to, a few different factors. One, how much of a fighter are you? Because keep in mind, if you're at a school where they have never had a small class, yes, legally you are entitled to make them have a small class, but you might have an uphill battle. We've been talking with parents who have just found out that their schools did not have a small class. And that's hard in January, because no matter what I can do for them, it is not going to make up the beginning of this year. So I feel like trying to make sure, you're all at this training, so you're obviously trying to get as much information as possible, but it is something to keep in mind, like, what do you think the likelihood of them being successful in serving your child is in reality? So one of the things we want to go through is, how do you figure out if a school has a small school? Somebody had said in one of the questions, well, they're kind of cagey. Yes, they are. And that's because of this yellow box where under the law, they have to do it. but in reality, so many of them don't provide ICT or small class in all subjects. So here's my, hopefully, as Chuck Schumer says, buckle up. This is a little bit complicated here, but how do you find out if a school has a small class or an ICT? You can go look up the school on the DOE website. And I'm saying on the DOE website, not my schools. So you'll see like a list of reports right in the middle, at least right now. That's one of the dangerous things with this is, they could reconfigure it, but somewhere on there, there's school quality reports. These are actually really interesting things to read, period. What you want to look at is school quality guide, which is, at least in the schools I looked at, it tends to be listed second, not the snapshot. There's a snapshot school quality guide, which is also interesting, but won't give you this level of information. Click on whatever gives you the more detailed information, and you'll see this is like just a little screenshot of the whole thing. You'll see a section that says students with disabilities. That minus section thing in the box, that minus sign on the left, is a plus. I clicked on it so you could see underneath it. This is a school with 20%. This is actually my son's high school, 20% students with disabilities, or 20.6. You can see that they have a fair number of kids in ICT. It's 14.4%. They have 68 kids out of 97 kids with disabilities in ICT, but they don't really have kids in self-contained. So if you're looking for a self-contained in a high school, you are not going to get it with this school unless they create it for you. And so if this is definitely the right school for you and you feel like you can get the support there, it doesn't mean that because you have self-contained on the IEP, you shouldn't list it. But what I would say, and this is with a history of fighting to try to break down a lot of barriers for my own son, know your battles, make sure you think that this is going to work, and fight them if you need to, right? I mean, it's not saying you shouldn't apply, but I think it's really important to go in with your eyes open as to what am I applying to, as opposed to being surprised that they don't have a small class, in math or something. Let's say you have a kid that has, or your school that you're looking at does have some small classes, but then you want to figure out, do they have it in the subjects that my child needs? Like Melissa was saying earlier, big schools tend to have music and sports programs. They also often have more small classes because they just have so many more students. But for some students with disabilities, then that's a really important question. Like my son, like what Melissa's child, my son does much better in a smaller school where people know him, where it's not, 3,000 kids. He would drown in that environment. He really needs people who know him personally. It really depends on the kid. There's no one right answer for this. But so for one place to look this up, and this is a link that we'll send out to you. This is on the detailed for school staff, and I think that it's required by New York City open data laws, class size reports. You can click on this thing here and it will take you to all of the public schools. You have to do some searching, either use Control F, which can find a school, or scroll down, but find the school you're looking at. And I found a school here, for example, that had, it's actually mostly special ed classes. They have 10 classes or 10 students in English Gen Ed. They have a whole bunch of ICT classes, and they actually have a whole bunch of small classes. I'm sorry, I can't remember at this point what the column headers are, but I think it's like number of students, number of classes, biggest and smallest range. There's a lot of information on here. This is all for last year, so it's never current information, but it will give you a good sense as to whether or not you're going to be breaking down barriers at the school for your child or not. So hopefully that helps answer like how to do some research and see, have they ever had a small class before? So tips for applying, I think we've said this throughout, but please only apply to schools that you would be happy to attend. I mean, do try to keep an open mind and cast a wide net, but don't apply to a school that you would be miserable at. Rank your true preferences. This is what they say every year. It is always hard for us to untangle because so many schools say, if you don't list me first, you won't get in. I never know what to say to that. I don't entirely understand the back end of the algorithm. Melissa and I were trying to figure this out before we came in, because I do feel like if you list your school first that you really want to get into, and they listed you 300th, but it gets down to there, it seems like you would have a better chance of getting in, if that makes sense. So I think that's where rank your true preferences. If something is a reach, but you really want to go there, rank it high. If something, you know, it's a reach, but you don't really care and you don't know that it's a great fit, rank it low. It's really hard to tell you exactly how to do this because it's so individualized for each student and what you're looking for. You should make, you know, your last picks, make sure you, or at least, I don't even know if it has to be your last pick. Make, you know, it's good to have a few safe schools that if you have some that you think you would get into, meaning it's a school that takes a wider range. That is much tougher to figure out right now. And this is for screen schools, but that's the majority of people looking and taking this tend to be asking about those schools. So, and look into schools that have multiple programs, if that's something that works for you, because it does mean for each program, you know, so for example, you list LaGuardia, I'm going to butcher this because I, you know, didn't apply to LaGuardia, but I think there's music and art and vocal or something like that. You can apply to LaGuardia 3 times and list those 3 things. Melissa might know.
You're absolutely on the right track. So
Yeah.
you vocal, music, art, you can list all of them.
We don't have artistic people in my family, so I don't know. But that's something that, you know, there's many schools that have multiple programs. If they do, make sure you list all of them on your application. They have a different number. Okay, so we're now going to get to questions. And then at the end, right after we do questions, we will go through some more resources. While we're answering some questions, I'm going to launch a poll about how helpful this training was to you. It's really helpful for us to know how things worked for you. So please answer that. And hold on. I just have to launch this one.
And while you do that, I wanted to just add to a question that came in about the geographical boundaries of certain schools, so such as Millennium School. So the question was that she assumed that schools like Millennium Brooklyn, which is a screen school, small school, and Melissa added preference is given to students who live in Brooklyn, to make sure to check the middle school, the high school directory to verify that the admissions criteria maintains geographic boundaries. So when in doubt, really look at the book and see what are the admissions criteria, and just to certify, just to make sure. If we have not answered your question, or if we partially answered your question, this is your opportunity to let us know. Please let us in.
And so also I wanted to add to what Liliana was just saying, families can check My Schools. And the reason why I keep directing families to My Schools is because families did receive hard copies. If you can request a hard copy of the admissions guide through the school before everything went back to remote again. But unfortunately, the hard copy admissions guide is not updated and it could be outdated. And because things are constantly changing, we're definitely recommending families to check under My Schools and see what the schools are requiring. Or most importantly, what I've been doing, because I'm also going through the process as well, is checking the school's individual website. And if you're not sure each school's individual website, in addition to stating what the admissions process is, if they don't have what you're looking for, they do have a contact person that you can reach out to and email or call if you don't have an access to email. But I can't reiterate this enough. If you do have a hard copy, I know I got one before schools closed down. Please make sure if there's any way you can check in with the guidance counselor, or if you don't have access to the internet, check in with somebody who can provide you with the most up-to-date information, because it seems like it's changing like overnight. And or check with the individual school's website. As Liliana was mentioning, Millennium is a screen school. It's a small school. They used to give school, Millennium High School used to give preference to students in Brooklyn. Kim, maybe you can answer this, but I'm not sure if that applies now. with the geographical changes?
You know, I'm
that
not
took
sure.
place?
I would just look on their site and try to figure it out. There's a few questions that I'm not sure of. Somebody had asked about the Shazat too, about whether or not there was a different day. And it's true, there used to be a different day and location for students with disabilities. I feel like I saw something about that, but I am not positive. I would reach out to your child, and it was somebody that was in public school. Reach out to your child's middle school, because that's where they're going to be administering it, and ask. Okay. One question that came in was from somebody saying they requested new IEPs and evaluations, but are still waiting. I would say, please email us, call us.
Yeah.
That's not okay. They're supposed to do the whole process within 60 school days from the date of consent. Hopefully they got your consent, but reach out to us. That's the kind of thing that, you know, I'm assuming you've already gone up the chain, like trying to reach out to the school. You can go to the district family advocate at the superintendent's office. You can try to find somebody up the chain, but if that doesn't work, and we saw a lot of delays during COVID with evaluations and IEPs, please reach out to us and we will try to get you some help. So our helpline is open Monday. Here, I'm going to get to actually that next slide. Okay, sorry, hold on. On our website, I'm sorry, I forgot about this one. We have live updates on COVID-19. So obviously this is constantly changing, but please check our website. We have a section that's just on what's going on with remote learning. We also have, this is a little bit of an old screenshot, but we have a whole lot of webinars that are recorded and saved on our webpage. So this is one that on our YouTube site. This webinar will be up on there, and if you registered for this, you will get a link to this recording. And then here is our website. I'm sorry, our helpline. It's Monday to Thursday, 10 to 4. You can call it toll free. You can also email in to info@advocatesforchildren.org, and we're happy to answer your questions. We can stay on for a bit and answer your questions. So that's fine, but just if you have to go, I know we're about, actually, we're not doing as bad as I thought. We're about 8 minutes over for what we thought this would take. Definitely reach out to us. Or if you're the parent who hasn't gotten an evaluation and you asked for one months and months ago, please reach out to us and we'll try to help.
Absolutely. And the email that Kim provided earlier, the special education email at schools.nyc.gov, you can also send them an email in addition to reaching out to us.
Okay. And then there's a couple of questions that came in that I thought would be useful to answer publicly. So if you're not in ICT or SETS, but get related services and various accommodations, so preferential seating, graphic organizers, etc., how does that work for whether you have a student with a disability? So I guess what they mean is, once you're in, does that affect the the admissions process at this point? And how does that get worked out later?
And that's the slightly complicated chart that we had, slide that we had with the seesaw thing, where student with disability is what we call in the law a term of art. It does not mean you have an IEP. Your child I wish they would be more careful with the lingo. It really means student with a disability who needs special classes, including, or an ICT. So, that's one of the tough things is, and I have a child who I've pushed to try to get as many supports and inclusive education as I can. So I'm sympathetic to that situation because, maybe you were in a middle school that didn't have an ICT. So you tried to get as many supports as you could, but you don't have an ICT. You won't fall into that student with disability bucket. That matters a lot typically because screen school, if you're looking for screen schools, it doesn't matter for non-screen schools. But for screen schools, they tend to have different criteria that are a little bit lower for students with disabilities. And the reason the DOE, I think the reason the DOE tried to come up with a balancing thing is they didn't want screen schools to select students, all of whom had like 2 sessions of speech on their IEP. Obviously, there's a wide range of students with disabilities and a wide range of IEPs. One thing that the DOE noticed, and this is, I don't know, maybe 6 years old, they noticed that screen schools were tending not to take students with disabilities. That's certainly true for the specialized schools, you know, for the LaGuardia, Brooklyn Tech, Bronx Science, stuff like that. But screen schools were also not taking a wide range of students, and they were not taking students with disabilities. So the DOE created, you know, I don't really like the word quota, but they said to a school, you have to take a certain number of students with disabilities. And schools said, well, we still need to screen them. And they said, okay, but then you need to create special screening criteria. And when they first rolled it out, what happened is they took all the kids with the special ed light, like just a little special ed, as opposed to the kids, like my son is on the deep end of the continuum. Like I think, but for my advocacy and pushing, he might have ended up in a District 75 school. So, you know, it depends on where your child falls. But for the student with disability category, you do need to be 20% or more of your special ed classes. 20% or more of your classes are special education. Now, that only matters if your child is doing less well. There's plenty of students with IEPs who are scoring really high. So it doesn't matter for that. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, somebody said my daughter receives sets 4 times a week. That's right. She would not fall in the students with disabilities bucket for high school applications. She would be a gen ed student. And it's unfortunate. It's just really confusing, the terminology. It doesn't mean your child's not going to get in. It just means that they're closer to a gen ed student than maybe a student who was in all small classes. So they're not going to get the I wouldn't even call it preferential. It's not preferential. In fact, some people feel like it's harmful and they don't want to list it. I don't think that's true either. Schools don't see your name. They don't see your child's name. They don't see what's on the IEP. That's another question we get a lot. I don't know if I saw that, but they don't see if your child is an ICT or small class or what your child's disability is. They only see of the people that applied, hey, Kim Madden's son applied to the school and he has an SWD next to his name. They don't see anything else about him. So somebody asked, is the 20% the same for middle and high school? Yes, but it doesn't matter for high school this year, right? Because high school is a lottery for everybody. It doesn't matter what your 4th grade tests were like. So if you want to apply to a super sought after middle school that in the past you would have needed to have 4s on state tests, go for it. It's a lottery. If you think it's the right fit for your child, as somebody who, it can be hard to push your child into a school where they're over their head. So that's something where you want to make sure that you think your child can do well there. Talk to the teachers, talk to the principal, make sure that they're going to be a place that is welcoming. And that's where I feel like we can't give you one answer to this, but how much, do you think this is going to work? And how much do you want to fight for it? Do you think this is, a school that is often a super sought after school may mean that they take kids that are super easy to teach. They don't really have to do anything. They just open a book and those kids learn because they're screening for those kids, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that's of all students, but it is a really complicated thing to figure out, and it's very personal. Somebody said, are small classes the same thing as self-contained? Yes, I'm sorry. We tend to use this lingo all over the place. SETS is special education teacher support services. In other words, like resource room. So you're not in a special class, but you have a teacher, and that's what it shows up as the IEP. It will say SETS. It used to be called resource room.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
What questions you want to take?
I've been typing while you're answering live.
Same here.
I'm trying to get through it.
And I want to welcome, thank you so much, everyone who's been asking the questions. And hopefully we can get some more answered.
My understanding, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, could you go over again how to access info in my school, like school information through my schools? Yes, absolutely. So you'll go under myschools.nyc, and you can, depending on what you're applying for, on that first page, unfortunately, you kind of have to scroll all the way down to see the directory. And the great thing about My Schools is that you can filter. So you can go into the let's say you're applying for high schools. You can either type in the name of the school or what your preferences are. So if your child likes swimming, you can filter the schools down to schools that only have a swim team. And so you would go through My Schools, specifically the directory, so either the middle school directory or the high school directory, type in the name of the school, and or it has different options where you can filter down and really get to the nitty gritty of what you're looking for in that particular school.
Somebody asked a question about BARD. I apologize. I think we said we were going to answer it live by accident. It was a really specific question about the test and the timing. I don't know the answer to that, but you should look at it. And I would talk to BARD, individually and see what they can tell you.
So Kim, did you answer the question about the family who had applied, had requested an IEP meeting a while ago and had not heard?
Yes, I said, please email us. If you
Yeah,
haven't
right,
gone
that's
up the
the
chain,
answer.
go up the chain yourself if you can make sure you've reached out to the principal and to the superintendent's office. You can email specialeducation@schools.nyc.gov. But if you're hitting a brick wall with that, please reach out because we've heard of way too many delays with evaluations at COVID. It's tough for schools as well, but they did not extend the timelines for evaluations. You still have a right. We did actually, there's a COVID and special education training on our YouTube site that Liliana and I did last month, I think. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But you still have a right to evaluations, and in-person evaluations if it's needed, depends on your comfort level, and to full evaluations. So if you want full evaluations or you want an IEP meeting where you can just talk about what's happened based on what you're seeing, you may not need full evaluations. Either way, you still have a right to evaluations in an IEP meeting for what your child needs.
Evaluations are still taking place. They're still happening.
Okay. And then did you answer this one? A parent is asking, we want him to be in an ICT setting as he has an IEP. How can we make sure that, how can we update that on My School? Thank you.
I would check in with the school, but it's probably too late. They would use last year's IEP. You can try to get it changed for this year, but I think that it's still, as it's been done in the past, it's already in whether or not your child has the, ICT IEP. It's going to be based on last year. Mm-hmm. So it is something that people really struggle with, is what does it mean to be a student with disability?
If all else fails, once the admissions process is over, you can always make a request or show that your child needs the ICT.
I mean, you can do it now, but I'm assuming the question is because you would like to qualify for that student with disability category for a spring school. That's too late. You should absolutely, if you think your child needs an ICT for high school, advocate for that now, but it's not going to help you with the application at this point. It's too late.
I think for those of you who are still here, as we read through missing questions, if there are any others, or if we haven't answered the question, please let us know again, recopy it, and we'll get back to you.
Oh, and one other one I just see in here is about NEST, which comes up a lot. NEST is one of those programs in the slide that Melissa covered that we call specialized programs, where it's a separate process. So apply to everything. You can list the NEST program, but actually, I don't even think you can list the NEST program. If you look at a school that has a NEST program, you'll see that NEST program on their site, but it has its own process. So, I think you can reach out to the ASD NEST program to talk to them about anything that can help you. Those are really sought after programs. So I know that it's very tough to get into. And they do have different programs in different schools, but it's a centralized program that, through the DOE, and they have more information on their website. So you can reach out there. There used to be an email on there. I think it's specialized programs at schools.nyc.gov, where you can email questions about it. Somebody wrote in, so I heard of somebody going to a family welcome center, just showing up, and they changed it to an ICT. That may have been somebody who moved into New York City. I feel like I've heard of people who were completely ineligible getting COVID vaccines too. But it's, so hey, you can always try anything, and we're only giving you the information that we have to date. Every year I learned so much from parents who are more creative or pushier than, you know, and I was like, wow, you got that? How did you get that? So I'm not saying you shouldn't try. We're just giving you the information that we know to date by what the policies are. It doesn't mean, you know, it might not work for you.
But to reach family welcome centers, please remember that you should do it online. I don't think that family welcome centers are fully open at this point. You should make sure to email them. I guess I wrote back just saying, you know, it's not a wasted effort to try, and you never know.
And particularly if the reason you didn't get it, and one question that I had for the DOE that I have not gotten answered yet is if the reason you didn't have an ICT is because it was COVID and you couldn't get evaluations and your child desperately needed it and you had, then I feel like argue that not just to the family welcome center, right into special education, talk to your school, try to see if there's anything you can do. This is a year where there ended up being a lot of situations like the parent who hasn't been able to get an evaluation or IEP where there may be, you know, really good reasons why they should change it now.
And I know that for students who do qualify for an SWDC, if the information is wrong online and they fall within that category, I was informed to reach out to the guidance counselor of the school and make sure that they update that on their end onto my schools, because there have been a few instances where parents, the information was not correct online, and that can be corrected. But as Kim was saying, to change it just so they can qualify for a special education seat is a different process. You know, parents do things differently every year. As a parent who walked into the Family Welcome Center, as Liliana was saying, it's closed this year. And so they're available by email and or is the phone number finally working, Kim, for the Family Welcome Center? For those who don't have email?
I had heard it would be working a couple months ago or a month and a half
okay.
ago, but I did not check to see if it would be. Supposedly it was. So
I don't want to advertise that, but I do want to give the families who don't have access to email that opportunity to know that, like, you can't walk in, but you can email and or call. Hopefully you can call. Again, if the information isn't correct and your child does qualify for that seat, I have heard that that can be corrected, but to change it so that the child can get a seat, that's different.
Yeah, and also I would say if you, it's probably unlikely if you were on this Zoom. One of the problems with Zooms is we tend not to reach the parents that might need us the most. But if you don't have email, or you know somebody that doesn't have email or isn't able to navigate these online systems, certainly you should be able to get information and help from the DOE. And if you don't, a lot of what our helpline has been doing during COVID is filling out device applications for parents that only have one phone with limited minutes and data. So we're helping them put through the requests, they speak another language and they're having a really hard time navigating it. We will do our best to help. So you can also reach out to our helpline. Oh, see, I love this. Somebody already wrote in and explained that they made a phone call to the Welcome Center in Harlem, and somebody was able to fix it while they were on because there was an error. That's great. I mean, if it's an error, that's really different, and that of course can happen where your IEP says ICT and my school says nope. And it's just because there was a screw up. The DOE is always, I guess all of us are always capable of making a mistake. That's the kind of thing that I would expect them to fix.
And that's wonderful. I'm glad that you had that experience, because that's what they're supposed to be there for, to help facilitate this process.
Thank you for sharing that. I had a similar experience with my daughter, but I reached out to the guidance counselor. The information was incorrect. There were a lot of her services missing, and she was not listed in the ICT classroom, and she was able to change that on her end immediately as well.
Someone again asked the question of, my child has 3 times a week sets and an ICT class recommendation. I think it depends on, is that ICT class recommendation for how many subjects? All subjects? Then absolutely you classify as a student with disability. Some subjects, it depends how many. Then you have to do the math with 35 periods a week and do the sets, and the ICT classes add up to 20%. Someone else asked, when could we listen again? We will send this out. It's not something that happens immediately after this. But it will happen within the next day or so. You'll get an email from us with the link, and it will be posted on our YouTube site as well.
Okay.
Oh, I thought I
Give a few
answered
more
it,
minutes.
and I didn't. Somebody asked, do we go to IEP meetings with parents? I really wish we could. We do go occasionally, but it almost always is on cases where we're already representing, because it's a really, complicated, hard case. We have really limited, unfortunately, we have really limited ability for legal representation. We can only represent families that meet our income guidelines, and we can only represent families if we have availability. And there's much more demand for our services than we're able to help.
Well, I will keep the question coming, but I have to tell you my favorite comment here. Parent says, thank you so much, Melissa and Kim. I feel ready for the ring of fire.
Yay! That's like our best picture. We never want to take that down.
Yeah, well, especially because it looks, the whole picture just really sort of sums up the process. And I know it is a really emotional and incredibly tough thing to go through as a parent. And say, don't forget to breathe, do as much research as you can. And then once you get it in, just try to relax till you find out. It's a lot to go through, and it's a really hard process. And definitely, certainly share with us if there's ideas you have for how we could improve this or information that would be helpful.
Did we get an opportunity to answer what if a child has no test scores or passing 6th and 7th grade, or passing grades in 6th and 7th grade?
I mean, I think, meaning there's no scores for them in 6th or 7th.
No test scores or passing grades in 6th and 7th grades. That's what it says.
So no test scores is not uncommon these days. If you opted out before and then COVID hit, I think it's something that for all kids, they're going to look at something. If they're going to look at a report card or anything in a school, or it also is not going to matter for schools that are more open with a lottery. They do take kids, for example, from private school where all they have is a private school reports, because those kids don't take the state tests in the same way that kids in public school do. So they are only looking at report cards. I think it's a really interesting question for during COVID, if it's something where it was, an incomplete because you didn't have a device. That's exactly why they were trying to push schools to be more creative, and why screen schools are so much tougher to figure out now. We didn't look through all of them, but there's a real range. So I would say just apply to a school that you think would work for your child regardless.
There's a question about extenuating circumstances that can help my child's high school application. I don't know if you answered that before.
I tried to. I think that was the ASD Nest one where I'm saying that's a separate process, and you can reach out to the specialized programs site.
Okay. All right.
It's separate from the high school application process. It's a whole different application, a whole different program in itself.
Okay, good. Let us know if we didn't answer it, because it just came up twice. That's why. Give you a thumbs up.
Oh, I see. It's receiving home instruction as an 8th grader. Well, the home instructor should be putting something in there, and getting promoted without passing. if I'm remembering the name right, this is also the parent who's contacting us because they didn't do evaluations in an IP. You should contact us.
Mhm.
That sounds complicated. Even apart from the application process, it sounds like your child may be struggling right now with school and needing more creative help. I think remote home instruction is a tricky thing during COVID because, you know, tons of people, I mean, my son's in high school, so all kids are doing theoretically home instruction. It's just obviously really different than traditional home instruction where it's just one person and an hour or two a day.
But because home instruction follows a plan, you might need to look at the specific plan and how it is that promotion is determined based on that plan. And that might be what they take a look at when they're looking at grades or test scores instead of. That was not very eloquent, but I hope you got the point. And yes, give us a call.
I love it.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's been, thank you for joining us, and good luck with the process.
Yes.
And check out our website for updates and, you know, for new trainings.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.